Common ground for conservatives and Bernie Sanders. I'm Scott Ott, and this episode of Bill Whittle Now is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. And Bill, we all know how conservatives, red-blooded, patriotic Americans like yourself, despise academia and the way that it has tilted so far leftward that we hardly want to send our kids to college anymore.
I should say that we despise the mixture of academia and politics, but.
No. Don't start quibbling now.
A distinction without a difference.
So that said, Democratic presidential candidate, former senator, I guess he's current senator, Bernie Sanders. I don't know if he's doing much senating these days, but Bernie Sanders has announced a plan to essentially forgive all $1.6 trillion of student loan debt. You know, the government is now the number one holder, perhaps the only holder of student loan debt in the country. And so he wants to let it all go. And comes now a story from CBS News, surprisingly, the day after I hear the Bernie Sanders story, that 2/3 of employees report regrets about their advanced degrees as Americans question the high cost of higher education. Bill, I think finally we found something where you and the Social Democrats can come together, because I know you're no fan of our higher education system, political or not. Why not just say everybody gets a fresh start, waive that $1.6 trillion in debt? It's just going to the government anyway. And what's another 1.6 on the pile?
Yeah, exactly. Why not? And while we're waiving the student debt, we might as well waive all the credit card debt too. I mean, just because I have a flat screen TV in my house, and have had it for years doesn't mean I need to pay for it or anything.
Well, the credit card debt is held by private companies, though, Bill.
Matter of fact, now that you mention it, why am I even going to continue making payments on my house either? We should probably just forgive that too and let everybody go. I don't see any distinction between not paying. I don't see any distinction between the government basically saying, forget the student loan debts, and then basically demanding that private companies do the same with credit card debts. It's not a question, Scott, of who you owe the money to. It's a question of, do you owe the money, yes or no? And the answer is yes. And this is yet another example of two things that have been going on. They're so perennial, they're practically laws of nature. One of them is that the Democrats are always going to be willing to buy votes from people with our money and take the credit for it. And the second thing is that you will never, ever run out of people who are willing to go along with this scam. It's a perfect example of why these people shouldn't even be allowed. I'm not going to say they shouldn't be allowed to be running, but honestly, this is why we can't have nice things in this country.
Well, Bill, think of the stimulative effect of this, because all that money that would have been thrown into the black hole of government spending is now going to be spent on other things, as people don't have to pay their student loan bills, so that frees up money that they can use to buy cars, build houses, and, go to Home Depot.
Great. And what does that tell them about buying cars, building houses, and going to Home Depot? It tells them that they can put it on the card, and at some point or another, if they're having a little difficulty with it, then that'll be erased too. The other thing that this is an example of, Scott, is this kind of generational child abuse that's been going on for 25, 30 years now. And it is the unbelievable crippling. It is child abuse, this crippling of an entire generation by simply giving them everything they want all the time. It has made an entire generation, through no fault of their own, I might add, into a nation of children who are not capable of dealing with any kind of hardship whatsoever. And so this appeals right to them, because this is the sound that they have heard their entire lives. This is the sound they've heard growing up. Oh my goodness, Erasmus, that is the most beautiful painting I've ever seen. That should hang in an art museum. Oh, you didn't win in the baseball game. Doesn't matter. You get a trophy just as big as everybody else, because our participating is the thing. And
Bill, all this is being suggested by a septuagenarian, not a millennial.
Well, no, of course not. It's a septuagenarian who has got his hand in the pockets of millennials, Scott. It's a septuagenarian who's never worked a day in his life. He has not had a job that was not a government job. His wife has been known to have defrauded a university of millions of dollars. The man who talks about socialism has 3 houses, Scott. Three houses. Bernie Sanders is the biggest fraud on the face of the earth, and the only people who are willing to buy into that are the young and the idealistic who have not been around long enough to have life. They had a chance to beat the stupid out of them yet. This backing down is what they saw in their childhood. It's what they saw in their adolescence, what they saw in high school. When they went to college, if they saw something that upset them, then they would have a temper tantrum like they would on the floor of a toy store. And they kicked and screamed until mommy bought them something. In the case of college, that meant that university administrators would come out with very serious expressions and say, we've been listening to your concerns and we sympathize with your position. And now that you don't want to learn anything, we're not going to grade any tests. And now that you are terrified of hearing something different than what you've already heard, we're going to make sure that you don't hear it. We're going to make sure that we don't invite these speakers of any kind that you don't agree with to campus. If they do come to campus, we're not going to provide police protection so that if you decide to rough them up a little bit, well, we'll just look the other way. And all of this has gone on and on and on. And every time something like this happens, it makes that generation weaker and weaker and weaker. And so if you're telling me that it's somehow good for the most undisciplined generation in American history, and I'm throwing in the boomers, of which I am one, and we set a pretty high bar in that regard. If you're telling me that by making the debt that they have taken on in life already, voluntarily as adults, signing on the dotted line, if we're telling them that we're just going to write that off, then we're basically telling them we can write off everything else. There's no reason why not to. And then you've got the world that Bernie Sanders, the socialist millionaire with 3 houses, wants.
Well, Bill,
a world where everybody is dependent on the handout from the government because there's no economy anymore.
This isn't an argument about whether or not we're going to have socialism in our education system. We already have socialism in our education system. The K through 12 education system is completely free. And as you probably well know, the money that's being charged by major universities.
Whoa. We are not going to play that game here. Okay? When you say K to 12 education is completely free, that's a lie. It's paid for by taxes on the state and local level, but it is not free. So every time I hear free anything,
and so all we're saying is pay for with taxes the college education now.
Hold on. So what we're going to do here in this little playground is we're not going to use words like free when it's not free. We're going to say it's paid for by somebody else and maybe given at no cost to those particular students, but it's not free. It's paid for by people who are working. Now, what you're talking about doing is saying, well, if we do that for K through 12, why don't we just do it for college kids? Now, that is not a good idea, but at least it's an idea. It's an idea. It is a concept. It is something that has its own value and integrity. And saying that we may want to make college tuition free is not the same thing as saying that you don't have to pay for a debt that you signed up for.
Well, you're going to love this because that's actually part 2 of Bernie's plan.
Now, am I entitled to my college tuition back?
Well, he would wipe the debt out for 45 million Americans, including all private and graduate school debt. And as you just suggested, he also plans to make public universities, community colleges, and trade schools tuition free. So he is doing that.
Let's talk about the tuition free part in a minute. Do I get my student loan money back?
No, it just gets wiped out. You don't have to pay.
So if I have any outstanding loan after, 45 years now, 43 years, if after 43 years I still owe my student debt money, the amount that I owe would be essentially zeroed out.
Correct.
So if only I had not paid my student loans, I'd be up several grand by now, right?
Correct.
You see any problem with this?
Well, the fact that you didn't have the foresight to withhold payments of student loan debt is not Bernie Sanders' problem.
Well played. Scott, when we're fighting for the life of this country now, between the forces of magical thinking and the forces that are convinced that reality matters. And to give them another win is to further undermine not just the United States economy, not just the university system, nothing. It is to undermine the idea that there is an external reality and that just because we want something to be true doesn't make it true. Now, that belief and the popularity of a belief like that is the result of a society that is so rich and so secure because of the capitalism, the hard work, and the sacrifice of the military over 250 years. But if you think that people who can wish away debt and have the debt just suddenly vanish, if you think that people like Bernie Sanders won't do anything to buy the votes he needs to continue his ego trip in this world that he doesn't live in. He's not a socialist. He has 3 houses, for God's sakes. He has $1 million from his recent tour. He could live on $50,000 or $100,000, donate the other $900,000 to the poor, but he doesn't. It's a scam. Fidel Castro had $900 million in his bank account when he died. Hugo Chavez's daughter has $4.3 billion. It's a scam, Scotty. And it's another way of buying votes from people who don't know better but should know better. It's another step on the road to ruin in this country, not because of the other $1 trillion it adds to the debt. That alone is enough to cause you, the debt alone is enough to cause you to never sleep again. But if we don't understand the fundamental principles of life, if I agree to borrow money from you, I have to pay it back. If you don't pay it back, if it turns out that the people who pay their debts on time are chumps and losers because they paid their debts on time, then the answer is going to be very, very simple. It's simple and inevitable. No one will lend any money to anyone. Why would they? Who would take the risk for a couple of measly percentage points to lend you the money for a house when your entire generation has been told that anytime something gets uncomfortable for you, just walk away from it? Why on earth would I write a loan like that? Why?
Well, I've kind of held back the best part of this story, and I think this is going to resolve all your concerns, Bill.
No question.
And we only have about 2 minutes to address this. But it's not that the student loan debt is not going to be paid back. In fact, Senator Sanders is proposing to pay for these plans, including the free college, with a tax on Wall Street that his campaign says will raise more than $2 trillion over 10 years, although some tax experts give lower estimates of what it might raise. So it's not that the debt is not going to be repaid. We're not teaching a bad lesson to kids and saying debts won't be repaid. Someone else will repay the debt for them.
Scotty, I have to say that the level of genius that you bring to this faux progressive position that you role play on this show is far above anything that's out there in the real world. So congratulations and bravo to you. The question, as I've been saying for this entire segment, from the beginning, from the first words out of my mouth, was not a question of whether or not the debt was repaid or who it was owed to or anything. The question is, did the people who take out the loans learn the lesson that they don't have to pay for money they borrow? And to say that the federal government is going to pay it back is to grant the case that, of course, they're not going to learn any lessons. Why would they? Why should they? There's always a big daddy government is always there to write the checks and get you out of trouble. And as long as you vote for him and do everything he tells you to, then everything should work out fine. This is another example, by the way, of Bernie Sanders using envy, which is the weapon of socialism. It's just envy. Somebody's got something nicer than you do. How does he have that? How come I don't have that? I want that for me. That's all socialism is. And so when he says he's going to pay your debt that you paid for, that you spent, the money that you signed on the dotted line for, probably the first act you ever did as a legal adult in this country, I agree to pay this. You took out $200,000 so you could study medieval Renaissance poetry and not have to get a real class, and now you're stuck with this debt as a consequence of your actions and inactions. Now this guy's going to come along and he's going to save you from the consequences of this action, so long, of course, as you vote for him. And if you can't see the damage that causes, and I know you can, although you do a marvelous job of pretending not to, then we are going to end up without an economy. And then, Scott, this coddled generation, this generation's never had to deal with hardship ever. They're not going to find themselves trying to pay their student loans for that month. They're going to find themselves out in the streets of this country roasting rats over burning tires because nothing works anymore. And I submit that paying your student loan back and understanding that borrowed money has to be repaid is less of a hardship than going through the rubble of our burning cities trying to catch a rat for dinner. And if you think I'm exaggerating, you haven't seen what happens to societies when everything that makes sense is outlawed and the people who do the right thing are made into chumps and losers.
The ideas of the progressive left, weighed, measured, and found wanting 5 times a week on Bill Whittle Now. This is made possible only by the members at BillWhittle.com who have ponied up their own money voluntarily to contribute to this enterprise. We're grateful to them. If you'd like to join them, go to BillWhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making it happen.